Soil constraints cost crop production in Australia $1.5 billion a year, and I'm sure you're all aware of parts of your property that are underperforming. And that's what makes this trial so exciting, to share the results of what we've implemented at 2 sites in the Wimmera. So the first of the sites is at Lubeck, which we established in 2019. And the problems that we were dealing with at this site was a sandy gravel that had really poor water holding capacity. So in contrast to the rest of the paddock, yields were quite low. Because it was so sandy, it was moderately acidic, but other than that, there were no other standout toxicities. What we've done to ameliorate these soils at Lubeck is in 2019 we applied ripping and non-ripping across the plots, and the amendments were a control for comparison, so nothing else above that. Chicken manure with rice hull base applied at 20 tonne. The aim of doing so was to increase nutrient and water holding capacity on that soil. It's not on the table, but we also applied chicken manure combined with 200 tonnes per hectare of clay. We've also applied clay at 2 rates to see whether we can increase the water infiltration and the water holding, so try and shift that soil more to a loamy profile than just this gutless sand. So in 2019 it was sown to wheat. In 2020 we re-sowed it with chickpeas after the canola failed. And in 2021, we've sown barley across the site. So what we've found at Lubeck with manuring is a 2 tonne yield response in barley compared to the control. So we've got 6.4 tonnes per hectare where manure has been applied at 20 tonne per hectare. And we've got manure combined with clay providing slightly better results as well. So it's good to see that the manure in this case on this particular soil has yielded results 3 years in a row. What we've found with claying at Lubeck is that things are finally starting to settle down. So initially in 2019 we had reduced establishment on those clayed plots and no yield response in the wheat. In 2020 the chickpeas had no establishment differences and no yield response. And this year in 21 the barley yields have responded, and where it was combined with manure, we actually got increased protein. So what we think is happening here is that the incorporation is improving as time goes on, a bit more rain to wash the clay down, and it's making the soil a bit more favourable for the crop. Moving up to the West Wimmera at Netherby, which you can see on the satellite image is just west of Lake Hindmarsh. We're dealing with 2 soil constraints in this paddock. So we've got a sand over clay with a hard pan at 15 centimetres. And Kate talked quite extensively about the hard pan last year at Trials Review Day. And we've also got non-wetting characteristics in this paddock. So the aerial image of the paddock on the left shows, you know, those ridges with the non-wetting. So what we've applied to this paddock is ripping and not ripping, as we did at Lubeck. We have a control for comparison, and we've applied manure, which is duck manure on a wood shaving base product to increase nutrient water holding. And as a control, we applied N and P to match each rate of duck manure. So to see whether the manure is providing anything above and beyond just nitrogen and phosphorus. We also applied clay at 2 rates there. While we had the ripper there and an opportunity to run a BCG members trial, we also looked at sowing pulses on deep root soil. So we sowed chickpeas and lentils in 2020 to see the response on those on the deep ripping. So what was found from manuring? I've sort of paired the manure rates with their respective fertiliser rates. So the letters above the bars indicate significant differences. So we've got responses to manure and fertiliser rate 3 from the control, and fertiliser rate 2 is different from the control. Interestingly though, what we've seen is that each respective fertiliser rate is the same as the manure rate. So those rates are: manure rate 3 is 20 tonnes per hectare of manure, and to match that we had to put 200 kilos of triple superphosphate, 120 of urea, and so on with the other treatments. I'd also like to point out on this slide that in the second year, the only ongoing response to manure has been where it's applied at 20 tonne. In terms of claying at Netherby, what we were trying to do is increase water infiltration and water holding, so reduce non-wetting. As you can see in that photo there, I don't think we've done it very well at a plot scale because of the machinery we're working with. Talking to the site host, he's also mentioned that incorporation is pretty important to the success of this practice. Also, the soil type that we clayed probably didn't need claying. There are other parts of the paddock that would be more responsive to clay, which you saw in that satellite image. So it's not to rule out claying in the West Wimmera, because there's certainly a lot of evidence that it's beneficial, but we haven't seen it at this trial site. So I'd refer you to the GRDC resource, spread, delve, spade and invert, for more information about whether claying's appropriate. In terms of deep ripping, we've had really good responses at Netherby. So we had that compaction layer at 15 centimetres, which we found with the penetrometer, the stick you push in the ground and measures resistance. And we've broken that up by deep ripping. So in the first year, in 2020, the chickpeas yielded 300 kilos better. The lentils didn't respond. And the wheat yielded 140 kilos better on the deep rip treatments. In 2021, we sowed wheat over the pulse plots, and that yield response continued with 200 kilos improvement. And we sowed barley over the wheat plots, and we had a 300 kilogram response. Where the wheat was put on the pulses, there was obviously a difference between the two stubble types, with the lentils yielding better. Interestingly, at Lubeck, we've had no responses in the third year to deep ripping at all. So it's probably not the soil type that needed ripping, and it wasn't limiting crop growth. So summing up the various soil amelioration techniques at the two sites, we've got deep ripping. To recap, at Lubeck, no response there. At Netherby, we've had a response ongoing for 2 years. So the interesting points that I'd like to highlight with that is that we always struggle with establishment on the deep ripped plots. It's always significantly reduced, and that we've identified compaction was a problem at Netherby. We alleviated the compaction with the deep ripping, and we're getting rewarded for it. So I'd encourage you to do the same thing to identify the issue before spending any money on it. With manuring at Lubeck, we've got that ongoing response with a chicken manure and rice hull product. At Netherby, we've had the response in the first year, but starting to steady off in the second year. So only 20 tonnes responded in the second year. And also equivalent fertiliser rates were yielding the same as manure product. So it sort of points out the variability of the product that you're getting with manure. They're not really comparable, the two manures that we've applied at the sites. The nutrient density of those products will vary depending on the batch and the animals you're running on it. And we've also noticed with the wood shaving manure, it's actually tying up a little bit of nitrogen as the shavings are breaking down. In claying, we've started to see a response in the third year at Lubeck, probably just because there's a bit more rain and it's settling down. At Netherby, we're yet to see a response. That could be because the soil type is not classically non-wetting, it's partially, but not classically. And we haven't incorporated it thoroughly. So the key points are getting that incorporation really effective, get the right data on, does this soil need claying? Is the clay I'm applying appropriate to be spreading? And using test strips to verify that.